Hello and welcome to EDHREC's Upping the Average, where we take a commander's average decklist as compiled by the data on EDHREC and make some swaps to it to help take it from a good start to a great one. Bust out your guidebooks, because this week, we're going monster hunting. YOLO, it's Volo, a blue-green human wizard who doubles our creature spells, but only as long as he's never seen their type before, either in play or in our graveyard. So far, Volo is the second most popular commander from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. His EDHREC page is a splendid menagerie of some extremely awesome creatures. I was tempted to make a gotta catch 'em all joke here, but the truth is that Volo doesn't want to catch 'em all because he loves unique types way too much. So let's get researching. Let's grab Volo's average deck list from the average deck feature and import it to the Architect deck building website. As always in this series, any swaps we make must either keep the total price of the deck cost neutral or else help lower the overall price of the deck. That's a lot of creatures! 36 is a high number even for some tribal decks, so this anti-tribal commander is doing himself justice. Doubling up any one of these is going to give us a lot of value. However, even just scrolling through them, we do see a little bit of overlap that we'll want to make sure that we address. This spell suite is also really solid. Like, really, really solid. The primary source of the swaps we'll end up making will definitely be in the creature loadout, although we should keep in mind that whenever we can supply an effect on a creature, we should strive to do so. Before we prep to make any changes, let's get to know how our commander plays. Whole creature types are shut off to us, so no Eternal Witness or Agent of Treacheries and such like that. I mean, we can play them, it's not like there's going to be a penalty for it, but we do want to double up our creatures to get maximum value. So, what are we doubling up? We've got a high number of mana dorks here, which can either power out Volo a turn early, or provide a nice boost later on. Our creatures provide tons of utility, since a card like Terastodon is really the only elephant we need, and Acidic Slime isn't contested by any other oozes. In fact, we don't have any other Salamander Pirates to usurp the Mutineer either. Some very eclectic creature types appear here too, with effects so good that we don't even mind when the creatures are legendary, like Karuga, Uro, and Ronus. The copy will die, but those are great effects to double up. Then, our support suite is practical and powerful, whether it's Vivian giving our creatures flash, Panharmonicon doubling up the ETB abilities, or Twinning Staff amplifying Volo's copy ability, because our commander is indeed copying spells. There's also a noteworthy infinite combo in this average deck data. Peregrine Drake is our only Drake, so it would make a copy of itself, untapping our lands as each enters. We can float mana in between each of those instances, putting tons of mana into our mana pool. And then, a Temur Sabertooth can return both Drakes to our hand. Obviously, the token will immediately vanish, but we can recast the original Drake all over again, untapping lands, then bouncing it back, recasting it, and so on, for a net gain of mana every time we repeat this loop. It doesn't win the game on the spot, since we do need a place to put all of that infinite mana, but even one other creature with an interesting Enter the Battlefield ability can then be bounced and recast with the Sabertooth, resulting in some absolutely crazy powerful plays. So it's at this point that I want to state that I do think we're starting to see a pattern here. When Volo was first announced, a lot of players were excited to see this restriction that prevents him from becoming, quote, just another generic good stuff Simic commander. Simic has a certain reputation in Commander that Volo appears to avoid, and to a degree it's true. We're not seeing 100% of the classic high-value Simic cards in this deck. But we are still seeing a lot of them. Craterhoof is the only beast we need to play, for example. Our deck probably wasn't going to play any other Sphinxes besides Consecrated Sphinx in the first place. There are definite costs, to be clear. Again, no Eternal Witness, and playing Beast Whisperer means we probably don't want to play Reclamation Sage, for example. Volo is a domino deck builder, a Sudoku puzzle commander, where changing just one card slot can cause cascading changes to the relative construction of the rest of the deck. This is interesting to build around, but I do want to be clear that in some cases, it's a small restriction to simply play the best Boar, or the best Dryad, or the best Horror. The real place that we feel the restriction is often not in the top end of the deck, behemoth's gonna be behemoths, but actually in the lower end support system. Volo is simultaneously a commander with a significant deck building restriction, and a deck that plays a lot of really good stuff. So with this in mind, let's see where we can make some upgrades. I'm gonna make changes in the following 3 ways. First, we need to address some rules non-bows. Then we'll have a creature clash. And finally, we'll upgrade our field guide. And don't forget to stick around for honorable mentions at the end for low and high budget suggestions. Let's get started by addressing those non-bows. For those who haven't heard the term before, a non-bow is a non-combo, an anti-synergy that sometimes causes the deck to stumble over itself. Definitely the kind of thing that we want to prune out of our list. Hello, Guardian Project, a quintessential Simic enchantment drawing tons of cards for creature-based decks like ours. However, if we're Voloing the way that we want to, this card won't actually do anything at all. When we cast a creature spell, it will be copied by Volo, so the token will enter the battlefield first. Guardian Project doesn't trigger on token creatures, so we draw nothing. Then the creature card itself will enter, and Guardian Project will check that thing's name and see that we already have another creature with that same name in play. So we'll, again, draw nothing. Yoink the project out of this list. We don't want it, because it's not doing its job. Then there's Apex Devastator, the Cascade Chimera Hydra. I've checked with judges, and they've told me that, yeah, the Cascade effect doesn't get copied when Volo doubles the Devastator. We're just copying this spell, and Cascade is an on-cast trigger, so the copied Devastator does not contribute to any further cascades. That makes this a 10 mana 10/10 that enters with another 10/10 token, and cascades 4 times, not 8. Now, that doesn't seem like a really horrible deal, to be honest. Like, 10 mana for 2 10/10s and 4 cascades is still pretty decent. We might even cascade into other creature spells to play, which Volo will indeed double. There are 2 other reasons why I'm inclined to take this one out of the list, though. First, the average list contains some stuff that would whiff if we were to cascade into it, namely counterspells. And second, while our deck doesn't contain any other chimeras, this does take up a slot that could be used on a Hydra. This is a perfectly fine card to continue using in Volo even despite the non-bow, but I am personally interested in other Hydras down the line. I'm also going to use this opportunity to remind you not to go out of your way to acquire a Parallel Lives or a Doubling Season for this deck, because both of those cards are showing up a little bit on Volo's EDH Rec page. Volo's ability copies our creature spells, and those copies become tokens, but that is a different rules interaction than creating tokens. It's a little counterintuitive, but Parallel Lives does not double up Volo's effect. Twinning Staff? Yes. Parallel Lives? No. Alright, that's some basic business out of the way, so now let's get talking about those creatures. The average list has supplied us with a very diverse spread of creature types, but we've got some dupes here. This is Elder Dragon Highlander, dang it, there can only be one. Honestly, our creatures are really awesome. 1 golem, 1 bird, 1 halfling citizen, and so on. However, there are a small number of overlaps that we have to address, so it's time for a creature clash smackdown. For example, Diluvian Primordial and Wandering Archaic are both avatars. Now, if we really wanted to, we could actually probably go forward with both of them. There's a possibility that we'll never draw both of these cards in the same game anyway, so Volo won't even really be bothered by that. However, I personally want to commit to having only one of each type whenever it's ideal. So, in this case, I personally lean towards keeping the Diluvian. Now, Wandering Archaic is awesome. I love that card every single time I see it, and it is a powerful deterrent to keep others from casting their spells. I can't even imagine the devastation that 2 of them could wreak. But 2 Diluvians is potentially 6 spells? And since we're so creature heavy in this deck, I really like the possibility of stealing tons of cool spells with just 1 cast. Either one of these is great, but I personally happen to favor the budget blue card here. So in that case, what should we replace the Archaic with? Well, I'm not yet seeing any Serpents in this list, so I'm gonna give it up for Junkwinder. This card is scary good for an uncommon, and 2 of them on our board should scare the crap out of our opponents. Whenever Volo copies a creature, the copy will become a token, including the copy of Junkwinder, so not only will this creature trigger pretty regularly, its affinity for tokens means it also will just cost next to nothing to cast in the first place. Clear the way, Junkwinder makes it hard to attack us, and even harder to block. Next, Hornet Queen versus Scoot Swarm. 2 insects enter, and only 1 may leave. I'm gonna Windmill Slam the Scoot Swarm here. This card's crazy pants. Hornet Queen's great, 7 mana for 10 total bodies, and flying Death Touchers at that, that's seriously great value. But I've seen Scoot Swarm pick up into the actual and literal thousands of tokens. I think it's worthwhile for me to point out, by the way, that this is one of the reasons why it's important to dig past mere averages. Both Hornet Queen and Scoot Swarm appear in 33-ish% of Volo decks so far, but those aren't the same decks. If you're not already using the advanced filters on the site, you absolutely should be. When we use them, we can see that the decks using Scoot Swarm are avoiding the Hornet Queen, and decks that prefer to use the Hornet Queen aren't using the Scoot Swarm. A third of players like the Scoots, and a different third of players like the Hornet Queen. That's important to know, so use advanced filters to help find those nuances to aid your own deck building. So back to business, what are we replacing the Queen with? Well, I don't spot any other mere constructs in this list, so mere Battlesphere is another means of flooding the board with tons of bodies. Let's do it to it. Getting back into the creature clashes, up next is Avenger of Zendikar and Muldrifter, both elementals. I don't think there's any true harm in running both of these, because again, we might not even draw both of them in a single game, But we're committing to the bit, so I'm gonna have to hand it to the Avenger here. That's so many bodies, it's impossible to pass up, and we have a lot of other ways we could draw cards than just the Muldrifter. As a replacement, I'm gonna go a little off the wall here, but I like Eidolon of Blossoms to draw us cards. The first one will enter and draw us 1 card because it is an enchantment to trigger Constellation, but when the next one enters, we'll draw 2 cards. 4 mana, draw 3 cards, get 2 bodies. That's a rate I'm really comfortable with. We don't have any other spirits, so this seems like a great inclusion. Speaking of landfall, there are also 2 snakes in this deck, Sakura Tribelder and Lotus Cobra. Sakura, you're one of the most popular cards, not just in green, but in all of EDH, but I'm sorry, I prefer the Cobra here. We've already seen a landfall sub-theme from other creatures in this deck, and 2 Lotus Cobras can facilitate so much powerful, explosive potential that it's not even funny. It's harder to replicate the Lotus Cobra's ability than it is to replicate the effects of the Tribelder. Just like I said earlier, Volo is indeed restricting some of our classic support pieces here, but the end result does tend to look a lot like the Simic power we've seen before. As a replacement for the Sakura, I think this calls for another Mana Dork. We've got a lot of creative ones in the list already, but Mana Weft Sliver is a unique type that we don't have already. It won't even accidentally benefit any other Changeling or Sliver players out there, because it also only counts our own Slivers. That nearly does it for our head-to-head creature features, but there are some others I have to mention here. Phyrexian Metamorph is a very curious card indeed. It's a shapeshifter, so the immediate comparison we have to make here is of course to Clever Impersonator. 2 shapeshifters, Volo is disappointed. Except he's not, really, because these will be copied by Volo while they're on the stack, and then they'll become something else when they hit play. So if we cast Clever Impersonator while Metamorphs are in play, we'll probably still get 2 Impersonators because the Metamorphs won't be shapeshifters at that time. The only time they'd present a real problem is if one of these is in the graveyard, since Volo counts both our battlefield and our dead creatures. I don't know about you, but that's an acceptable risk for me. I'm not quite done talking about the Metamorph just yet, though. As it turns out, it's not just a shapeshifter, it's a Phyrexian shapeshifter. And our friend Wormcoil Engine, that's not just a worm, it's a Phyrexian worm. In a recent creature type update, these cards have both been errated to also be a Phyrexian type. So if the worm is in play or in our graveyard when we cast the Metamorph, we don't get 2 Metamorphs. I'm torn here, because I promised that I would commit to the bit, and removing the Metamorph avoids 2 overlapping creature conundrums, Shapeshifter and Phyrexian. However, I really do feel that the nature of clone effects like these, which can copy non-creature permanents, means that it's quite rare that we'll ever encounter issues where the Metamorph winds up in the graveyard and stops us from getting additional value from our Clever Impersonator or our Wormcoil Engine, or vice versa. Just make sure you're aware of this overlap. I don't think it stops the value train, but there are hypothetically cases that it could. So in that case, if you would prefer to remove this card to avoid any possible overlaps, I'll throw out an idea here for a creature type that I don't see in the list at all. Spike. Spike Weaver's roughly the same price as the Metamorph, and it comes with 3 fogs on a stick, more if you happen to be able to put additional counters on it. This thing is extremely tough to break through, so if you're in the market for a super strange creature type, give this one a look. 2 of these basically means you're never getting attacked. That's it for our overlaps, but we're not done just yet. We've got a few other general swaps to make in Section 3. It's not all about the head-to-head duels. Now that we're done with the creature clashes, we've just got a few small individual spots to polish up. So Mana War is indeed the only jellyfish in the list, but I don't think that makes it worth the slot. We don't just want unique types, we want the effects to be super awesome, and I don't think this happens to tick that box. It's just impermanent removal is all. I'm also going to give a little side-eye to that there Growth Spiral. This is a small value spell that I like, but not enough to justify in this specific deck. We want the general value pieces to be packed in copyable creature form. The non-creature spells we play should be somewhat unique in their offerings, or else be uber consistent. I think we've got the ramp and draw value covered already, and we can squeeze this out to make room for a bigger blowout spell instead. Lastly, I don't know why this is, but I just don't really care for Double Major. It's doing a lot of what we're already doing, which is really cool, but I guess I don't personally feel like the redundancy pays off in ways that we need it to. The most important facet to this card is its ability to make a copy of legendary creatures, like our very own commander, to add to his abilities, but the timing on that was just extremely awkward to me in playtesting. There are other copy effects I think we could play instead. So let's get to those. First, we make a lot of creatures, so Return of the Wild Speaker needs to be in this deck yesterday. If we're going wide for an all-out attack, this wins games. And if we have some random 7/7, this instantly draws cards. Spell's great, slam it in here. Right after that, I want to add in Reality Shift. We have a lot of creatures in this deck, which means a lot of our plays occur at sorcery speed. And the interaction we have with enemy creatures right now is a little bit low. Reality Shift is one of the best creature removal spells in the game, so let's get it in here to make sure we don't die to someone's super powerful commander popping off while we're out looking for creatures in the field. Speaking of popping off, my last addition is this random little troll, or rather, the back half of him. I feel like in all the perpetual preview seasons, this card must have passed me by or something. This looks really crazy awesome for Volo. Our entire game plan revolves around putting bodies into play, and some of our biggest creatures make a whole lot of bodies at once. Transforming a bunch of tokens and random mana dorks into sudden 5/5s or 6/6s, that's a game-winning spell. This is a troll druid in our graveyard, so it does have a conflicting type with Beast Whisperer that we have to be aware of, but since this is the type of spell we only cast when we're about to shut things down, I do think that that's an overlap that will basically never ever come up. But wait, we're still only at 98 cards because we removed 2 others way earlier. What's going in for those? Easy. Lands! This deck needs the resources to actually cast these big beasties, so I'm including 2 more here. In fact, I'm even swapping out 2 other less interesting lands to get the classic Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic in here too, because we have cards that care about landfall triggers. These specific utility lands, though, are really fun. One makes copies, which is exactly the type of late game value we can make great use out of, and the other is classic Grave Hate. In fact, Scavenger Grounds will even empty our own graveyard if we happen to have a creature type overlap in there. So hey, there's bonus utility there too. We're almost done, but before we go, I want to bust out those honorable mentions. This deck contains some expensive cards, so I want to propose some other places to look instead. For example, not everyone owns a $50 Craterhoof Behemoth, but Blossoming Bogbeast is like $1, and as a beast, it's excellent. 2 of these will turn nearly any board lethal because one will trigger for +2 and the next one will trigger for +4, giving a total of +6 and trample to all of our creatures. That's bomb. Consecrated Sphinx is the next most expensive creature, and we don't need a crazy expensive Sphinx to do all of that for us. Might I recommend that if you're looking for a great budget Sphinx, you use the Master of Shards? Multiple copies of this critter see the others, so they spit out Thopter tokens at such a crazy high rate that I struggle to put it into words. Just like the Scoot Swarm, I've assembled literal hundreds of tokens by copying this creature. Wormcoil Engine is also very, very pricey, so if you don't have it, I'm going to make a left field suggestion here. There aren't any Eldrazi in this deck, and Drowner of Hope is both cheap and great to copy. That's a lot of bodies in play that our power-up creatures can take advantage of. Not only that, but it can refund us on mana if we need it to, or it can tap down enemy blockers and attackers. This is a pretty cool card. Oh, and Tendershoot Dryad is climbing up in price too. 2 of these makes the board go absolutely bananas, but it's very pricey, and let's face it, Uro and Birds of Paradise aren't cheap cards either nowadays. For potential budget inclusions, I'd like to shout out Great Oak Guardian, because we don't have any Treefolk in the list already. 2 creatures ETB, untap our stuff, and buff everything for +4? Yeah, that's gas. For other suggestions, I've also noticed we have no dragons, too. I think the initial instinct is to go right for Kaiga the Tidestar. Volo would copy it, one of them would immediately die, and then we can steal someone else's creature. I'm not entirely sold on this though, because the other copy of Kaiga is likely to do very little. In my experience, when that Kaiga dies, it's because of a board wipe, so she doesn't get to steal any creature, because they're all dead. Plus, she's not just a dragon, she's also a spirit. But remember, we added a spirit earlier that this would kinda contradict, and there could be other spirits that we want to upgrade into down the line anyway. So I'm actually going to opt instead for our dragon to be Steel Hellkite. Like I mentioned before, we're a little light on removal, and 2 of these jabronis in the air means our opponents have a very, very difficult time keeping stuff in play, especially tokens, which makes it perfect for our billowing army to overwhelm our enemies. And finally, as a replacement for the Mana Dork Birds of Paradise, well, we don't have a Dryad anymore because we removed Tendershoot for being too expensive, so how about Sanctum Weaver? It's a simple Mana Dork, but if we happen to copy it, each of them will see each other, tapping for 4 total mana. That's pretty good for a 2-drop. And hey, bonus points if we happen to get this out with the Eidolon at the same time. Those were just creatures though. There are 2 hyper expensive lands in the mana base too, which can be swapped out for any old color fixers. Don't sweat the mana bases. Volo is super powerful even if some of his lands are coming into play tapped. Then there's Rhystic Study, of course, and honestly, with the value we're spitting out, I'm not even too worried about replacing the card draw effect too much because I think we could still stand to amp up our removal a little bit. Rapid Hybridization, for example, could join the Pongify that's already in the list, and those instants can really save our skin. And speaking of instants, Cyclonic Rift and some of those counterspells are also very high on the price tags. But don't sweat them. Evacuation is a fine pseudo-wipe that even lets us reset our own value ETB cards. And there are plenty of other counterspells we can use to protect our board that cost like a fraction of the percentage of the price of things like Fierce Guardianship. So I realized while recording that I apparently had a whole lot to say about the potential budget alternatives that could be swapped into this deck. And when I started doing the math, I saw that those swaps that I just suggested for a more budget-friendly version of the deck would save you over $300. And that's pretty intense. So you know what? We're going to have two deck lists for this episode. One that adheres more closely to the average like we've been doing for the majority of the video, and then one also for those budget-friendly swaps. Because why not? Plus, it's a Volo deck, and he makes copies, right? So two deck lists, it's only fitting. But you know what? We're still not done, because I also want to shout out some honorable mentions for higher budget upgrades. The first one I have to mention here is absolutely the GOAT. No, literally, it's a GOAT, and it also is the greatest of all time. Pathbreaker Ibex is incredible in general, but it's even better when you get two of these triggers on the stack. I actually think our avatar friend may not survive the cut once we're upgrading into the fantastic GOAT. Seriously, Pathbreaker Ibex I cannot recommend enough for Volo. Oh, and savvy viewers may also have noticed that earlier I removed a Hydra, but I never officially replaced it with another Hydra. That's because I've been saving it for this moment. Have you ever attacked with two Colonian Hydras? Because it's insane. It's silly pants. It's 32 damage with trample on the first attack step. And on the following turn, it will be 128 damage with trample. All of that for 5 mana, that we can play the turn after we cast our commander. If you want a Hydra in your Volo deck and you want to upgrade beyond the Apex Devastator, this is the one to get. Oh, and as a final parting thought, dedicated Volo players may dabble here and there with a little creature type exchanging, or even graveyard self-exile so they can reshape their critters into any type they want, allowing us to play and double up any creatures at all. Just some food for thought. This guy's got tricks. That was a really long day out studying creatures in the field, but this should officially do it for us. You can find both deck lists for this commander in the description below with the cuts in the maybe board. I hope you've enjoyed Volo's zoology lesson, and if you have other ideas for unexplored creature types that you think Volo players ought to be including in their menageries, make sure you leave your discoveries in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.